I've served as a homicide detective in Texas for nearly 15 years, but nothing could have prepared me for what I encountered in the quiet town of Redwood. It was the kind of place where people left their doors unlocked, where neighbors greeted each other with pies on Sundays, and crime rarely went beyond. On July 14th, just past midnight, a 911 call shattered that sense of calm. Dispatch reported a child. The caller was a teenage girl, her voice trembling, words broken between sobs. She said her 8-year-old brother wasn't breathing. When I arrived at the small 2-story home on Willow Creek Lane, patrol officers had already cordoned off the area. The flashing red and blue lights painted. I stepped inside, greeted by the heavy silence that always follows sudden death. The boy, later confirmed as Ethan Miller, lay on his bed. His face was pale, lips tinged with blue. At first glance, one might mistake it for a medical emergency, an asthma attack maybe, or sudden cardiac arrest. But my instincts told me otherwise. Years of experience had trained me to notice the smallest details, and something felt disturbingly wrong. The room itself was in disarray. Toys scattered across the carpet, drawers half open, sheets pulled halfway off the bed. But what made my stomach tighten was the message written on the wall in thick red marker. It wasn't me. The words were large, uneven, rushed, as though scribbled in panic. Standing nearby was Ethan's older sister, Clara Miller, just 17 years old. Her eyes were red from crying, her hands trembling as she clutched a blanket. She kept repeating, "I didn't do anything. I found him like this." Her parents weren't home. They had been attending a family gathering across town and rushed back only after the police contacted them. I asked Clara to recount what happened. Between sobs, she explained she had been downstairs listening to music when she decided to check on Ethan. That's when she discovered him motionless, with the chilling message scrawled across his wall. I listened carefully, but my attention drifted back to the body. Our forensic team soon confirmed my suspicion. Ethan hadn't died naturally. There were faint bruises around his neck, subtle but undeniable. The cause of death was suffocation. The realization sent a cold shiver down my spine. This was no accident. It was murder. The first and most obvious suspect was Clara. She was alone with Ethan, the last person to see him alive. Her fingerprints were everywhere in the room, though that was expected. She lived there. Still, there was something about her demeanor that made me pause. Her fear seemed genuine, yet her story had gaps. Why would someone write "it wasn't me" on the wall? Was it Clara desperately trying to proclaim innocence? Or was it the killer taunting us from the shadows? As we escorted Clara to the station for further questioning, I caught sight of the neighbors gathering outside, whispering among themselves. In small towns like Redwood, secrets don't stay hidden for long. Everyone knows everyone else's history, but sometimes what they know is only the surface. That night, as I stood in the dimly lit interrogation room watching Clara wipe her tears, I couldn't shake the feeling that this case would be unlike any other I'd. The station was unusually quiet that night, the kind of silence that makes every tick of the clock feel heavier. I sat across from Clara Miller in the interrogation room. Her hands were folded tightly in her lap, her eyes swollen from crying. A half-empty bottle of water sat untouched in front of her. I began gently. "Clara, I need you to tell me exactly what happened tonight. Step by step." Her voice was barely above a whisper. I was downstairs in the living room. I had my headphones on. Then I thought I heard something, like a thump. I went upstairs to check on Ethan. When I opened his door, he wasn't moving. I tried shaking him, but he wouldn't wake up. And then I saw the wall, the writing. I don't know who did it. I swear I didn't. Her words trembled, but I paid close attention to her phrasing. She mentioned the writing after describing Ethan. Most people would notice the writing immediately. It was bold, red, impossible to miss. Was she hiding something, or simply overwhelmed? I asked her if anyone else had been in the house. She shook her head. "No one. Just me and Ethan. Mom and Dad left around 6. That narrowed the timeline. Ethan was alive when the parents left. dead by midnight. Only Clara was present. But there was something off. The forensic team reported faint scratches on Ethan's arms, as though he had fought back. Samples were taken from under his fingernails. If Clara had been involved, DNA evidence would tell us. But results would take days. Clara, I pressed, leaning forward. Why would someone write, "It wasn't me" on the wall? Any idea? She shook her head quickly, biting her lip. I don't know. Maybe Ethan wrote it? Maybe before. She broke down, sobbing into her hands. The theory didn't hold. Ethan was only 8. His handwriting would have been childish, uneven. The message on the wall looked rushed but deliberate, written by someone older. I ended the session for the night, letting her rest in juvenile holding until we gathered more evidence. She was a suspect, but not a confirmed one. My gut told me the story wasn't that simple. The next morning I returned to the Miller home with our crime scene team. We combed through every inch of that room. That's when we found something chilling, a single muddy footprint near the window. It didn't match Clara's shoe size. Too large. I looked at the lock on the window. It had faint scratches, as if someone had forced it open. Suddenly, a new possibility formed. Maybe someone had entered the house that night. Later that afternoon, I canvassed the neighborhood. One of the neighbors, Mrs. Palmer, mentioned seeing a boy hanging around the Millers' backyard a few times in recent weeks. A teenager. Tall, dark hair. She assumed he was Clara's friend. Back at the station, I confronted Clara with the information. Her eyes widened, and for a moment, fear replaced her sadness. I don't know who you're talking about, she whispered too quickly. It was a lie. I knew it. And in that moment, the case shifted. This wasn't just about a teenage girl and her little brother anymore. There was someone else. Someone lurking in the shadows of Redwood. But who was he? And why was Ethan the one who ended up dead? As I left the room, Clara's last words echoed in my mind. I didn't do it, but I know who did. That was the first time she admitted there was someone else, and it wouldn't be the last. Every case has a turning point, a single clue that shifts the path of the entire investigation. For me, that clue was the muddy footprint near Ethan's window. The lab confirmed what I suspected. The print didn't belong to Clara. It was a size 11 men's shoe, worn down at the heel. Whoever it was, he was older, heavier, and definitely not an 8-year-old child or a teenage girl. I went back to Clara the next day. She looked exhausted, her shoulders hunched as if the weight of the world was pressing down on her. I showed her a photograph of the footprint. "This isn't yours," I said. "So whose is it?" Her lips parted, but no words came out. She shifted uncomfortably, eyes darting to the corner of the room. That silence told me everything. Clara wasn't the killer, but she was hiding someone. After hours of hesitation, she finally whispered, "His name is Jake. Jake Lawson. He comes around sometimes." Jake Lawson. The name wasn't in our records, at least not for serious crimes, but Redwood was small. Everyone knew the Lawson family. Jake was 19, dropped out of high school last year. Rumors swirled about him. Drugs, fights, stealing cars. The kind of troublemaker small towns produce when boredom and anger collide. "Was Jake in your house that night?" I asked. Clara froze, then shook her head too quickly. "No, he wasn't, I swear." But denial only made my suspicions stronger. That evening, I drove out to the edge of Redwood, where the Lawson family lived in a sagging one-story house surrounded by overgrown weeds. Jake's truck sat in the driveway, mud still caked on its tires. He opened the door when I knocked, tall and lanky, with dark eyes that revealed nothing. "Detective," he said flatly. "What's this about?" "Ethan Miller." The arrogance in his tone made my fist clench, but I kept calm. "We found a footprint at the scene, size 11, matches your shoe." His smile faded for just a second, then returned, forced. "Lot of people wear size 11, detective. Doesn't mean I killed anyone." He was right. Legally, a footprint wasn't enough to pin him, but it was enough to keep him under a spotlight. As I turned to leave, I noticed something chilling. On his forearm, half hidden beneath his sleeve, was a smear of faded red marker ink, the same kind used to write, "It wasn't me," on Ethan's wall. That night, back at the station, I pieced the puzzle together. Clara wasn't lying when she said she didn't kill Ethan, but she was lying about Jake not being there. My gut told me Jake had been inside that house. Maybe things had spiraled out of control. Maybe Ethan had walked in on something he wasn't supposed to see. Still, motive was unclear. Why would a 19-year-old target an 8-year-old boy? I couldn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Ethan's pale face, the red scrawl on the wall, and Jake's cold, unblinking eyes. This wasn't just a murder. It was a message. And the worst part? I was starting to fear that message wasn't meant for us. It was meant for Clara. The next morning, I brought Clara back into the interrogation room. She looked even more fragile than before, her hands twisting together nervously. I didn't waste time. "Clara, I spoke to Jake Lawson," I said. Her eyes widened, panic flashing across her face. She tried to steady her breathing, but it was useless. Her fear betrayed her. "You lied to me," I continued. "You told me Jake wasn't in the house, but he was. We found his footprint by the window, and I saw the red ink on his arm. He was inside your brother's room, wasn't he?" Clara buried her face in her hands. For a long moment, she stayed silent. Then, in a broken whisper, she said, "I didn't want to get him in trouble. I thought I could protect him." My jaw clenched. Protect him? From what? He was already our prime suspect in a child's murder. She lifted her head, tears streaking her cheeks. "Jake didn't mean for it to happen. He lost his temper. Ethan walked in while we were fighting. He got scared. He tried to scream. Jake panicked." Her words hung in the air like poison. She was confessing without confessing. I leaned forward. "Clara, tell me exactly what happened that night." She swallowed hard. "Jake came over after my parents left. We were arguing. About us. About how he wanted me to leave with him. Then Ethan woke up and came into the room. He saw Jake yelling. He started crying, and Jake snapped. He grabbed Ethan, covered his mouth, told him to shut up. I screamed at him to stop, but by the time he let go, her voice broke. Ethan wasn't breathing. I sat back, the gravity of the confession settling in. It made sense. The panic, the writing on the wall, the footprint. But one detail didn't fit. "Why write 'it wasn't me'?" I asked quietly. Clara shook her head. "I don't know. He grabbed the marker and just did it. Maybe he thought it would throw people off, or maybe he was losing his mind." Her story painted Jake as impulsive, violent, reckless. But something gnawed at me. The crime scene didn't look impulsive. It looked staged, the writing, the window, the footprint. Later that day, I brought Jake back in for questioning. He leaned back in the chair, smirking like a man who believed he was untouchable. "Clara says you killed her brother," I told him flatly. Jake chuckled. "Of course she'd say that. You think I'd risk everything for some stupid fight? Come on, detective. You're smarter than that." "Your footprint was at the scene," I pressed. "The ink on your arm matches the marker. You were there." His smirk faltered for just a heartbeat. Then he leaned forward, lowering his voice. "I didn't kill that kid. You're chasing the wrong guy. Clara. She's not as innocent as you think." The accusation hit me like a punch to the gut. Was he bluffing to save himself? Or was Clara twisting the story to protect her own image? I left the room more unsettled than when I entered. 2 suspects, 2 stories, each pointing at the other, and Ethan's killer still lurking in the shadows of the truth. By now, the case had twisted into a storm of contradictions. Clara accused Jake. Jake accused Clara. Both had motive, both had opportunity, and both were drowning in lies. But lies can't erase evidence, and evidence never lies. The DNA results from the lab arrived late that evening. My pulse quickened as I scanned the report. Samples taken from beneath Ethan's fingernails revealed 2 sets of DNA. One belonged to Clara. The other matched Jake Lawson. It was confirmation that Ethan had struggled against both of them. I stared at the report, uneasy. Clara admitted to trying to pull Ethan away from Jake. Maybe that explained her DNA. But the idea that Ethan had scratched both his sister and her boyfriend in his final moments was haunting. I returned to Clara's holding cell. "The lab results are in," I said. "Ethan fought both of you." Her eyes widened in shock. "No, that can't be right. I tried to save him, not hurt him. But science doesn't care about intentions. It records only contact, struggle, survival." Then came another. I decided to confront Jake one more time. He greeted me with his usual arrogance, lounging in the interrogation chair like he owned it. "You're running out of room to lie," I told him, dropping the evidence file on the table. "Ethan scratched you. Your fibers were on his clothes. You can't talk your way out of this." Jake's smirk wavered. For the first time, he looked cornered. But then, instead of denying, he leaned forward with a chilling calm. "Yeah, I was there. I tried to shut the brat up, but you don't get it, detective." His eyes hardened. Clara wanted it. She begged me to make him stop crying. She hated him. Always complained he ruined everything. I just gave her what she wanted. The words crawled under my skin like ice. When I confronted Clara with Jake's claim, she broke down. "He's lying." "I never wanted Ethan hurt. I loved my brother. Jake's twisting everything." 2 confessions, 2 versions of the same crime, each one pointing fingers at the other. And then, just as the pieces, our tech team recovered deleted messages from Clara's phone. Dozens of texts between her and Jake. Arguments, secrets, late-night plans. And one message, sent just hours before Ethan's death, froze my blood. "Clara, I can't take him anymore. I wish he'd just disappear." The timestamp was undeniable. Clara had typed those words at 10:47 p.m., barely an hour before her brother was killed. Suddenly, the picture shifted again. Maybe Jake wasn't lying. Maybe Clara had planted the idea, and Jake had only acted on her unspoken wish. But was it a wish or a command? As I stood staring at that message, I realized something terrible. This wasn't a simple case of a violent boyfriend. This was a storm of manipulation, fear, and rage. And in the middle of it all was a dead child who had simply walked into the wrong moment. The town of Redwood was already buzzing with rumors, but the truth was darker than any of them could imagine. Because now, I wasn't just hunting a killer. I was trying to untangle a deadly pact between 2 teenagers, bound by love, lies, and blood. The more I studied Clara and Jake, the more I saw them not as individuals, but as 2 halves of a dangerous whole. Together, they were volatile, a storm waiting to break. The text message from Clara changed everything. "I wish he'd just disappear." Was it an idle outburst of frustration, or was it something more sinister? I called her back into the interrogation room. She sat stiffly, pale, her eyes fixed on the floor. "Clara," I said, placing her phone records on the table. "Explain this." Her eyes flicked to the screen and tears welled up. I didn't mean it. I was angry. Ethan was always running to Mom and Dad, always ruining things for me, but I never wanted him dead. I swear it. Her explanation was emotional, but hollow. Words are easy. Intent is harder to prove. Meanwhile, Jake wasn't silent either. In his second interrogation, he leaned forward, speaking almost conspiratorially. She begged me to help her, said Ethan was the reason her parents hated her, the reason she couldn't leave with me. She said if he was gone, she'd be free. I watched him carefully. He believed his own story, or at least wanted me to believe it. But the most chilling moment came when I asked, "So whose idea was it to write on the wall?" Jake smirked. "Not mine." When I asked Clara the same question later, she froze, then whispered, "It wasn't me either." That meant one of them was lying, or someone else had been there. The footprint, the writing, the scratches, all tangled into a web I couldn't yet unravel. But the deeper I dug, the more the idea of a pact haunted me. Clara and Jake weren't simply blaming each other. They had been partners. That night, unable to shake the thought, I returned to the Miller home. The family hadn't moved back in. The house stood silent, heavy with grief. I walked into Ethan's room once more. The red words on the wall still screamed at me. It wasn't me. I studied them under a forensic light, and that's when I noticed it. Tiny flecks of marker ink smeared near the edge of the bed frame, lower down, at a child's height. A new possibility chilled me to the core. What if Ethan himself had written it? If so, it meant he had been conscious when attacked. He had tried to leave a final message, his last desperate attempt to shift suspicion away from someone he loved, someone like his sister. The thought tightened my chest. Did Ethan die trying to protect Clara? I went back to the lab with photos of the handwriting. A specialist compared it to Ethan's school notebooks. The result was inconclusive. The letters were messy, rushed, unlike his neat homework. But there were similarities, enough to keep the question alive. If Ethan had written those words, then everything changed. Jake might have been the hand that ended his life, but Clara might have been the reason Ethan believed she needed protecting. The case was no longer black and white. It was bleeding into shades of gray, where love, guilt. By the 7th day of the investigation, Redwood was no longer the quiet little town I knew. News vans crowded Willow Creek Lane. Reporters shouted questions at me as if I held the answers carved in stone. But the truth was, the deeper I dug, the less certain I became. Clara and Jake, two teenagers whose lives had spiraled into darkness. Was Ethan's death a tragic accident, a crime of passion, or something darker, a plan they carried together? I needed a crack, something that would shatter the lies. It came late one night in the form of a hidden message. Our tech team, combing through Jake's old laptop, found fragments of a deleted document. The file name was chilling. The plan. It wasn't complete, but the fragments painted a disturbing picture. Lines like, "Parents gone. Perfect time. He's the problem. She knows it. We'll be free after this." When I read it aloud in the squad room, the air grew heavy. Some officers cursed under their breath. Others looked at me with pity. The next morning, I called Jake in for another round. He smirked at first, but when I dropped the file on the table, his face went pale. "You think this proves something?" he muttered. "It proves intent," I shot back. "It proves you were planning something that night." He clenched his fists, leaned forward, and for the first time dropped his cocky facade. His voice cracked with anger. She wanted it. She begged me to help her. She said if Ethan was gone, she could finally run away with me. Don't you get it? I was just doing what she wanted. Later that day, I confronted Clara with the same evidence. She collapsed into sobs, shaking her head violently. "I didn't write that. I didn't know about it. Jake made it up. He's trying to frame me because he knows you'll believe him over me." But then I pressed her. "Why did Ethan write, 'It wasn't me'?" Her sobbing stopped instantly. Her face drained of color, and in that silence I realized she knew something. "You saw him write it, didn't you?" I whispered. Clara's lips trembled. Tears slipped down her cheeks. He thought I told Jake to do it. But I didn't. I didn't. It was the closest she'd come to admitting the unthinkable, that her little brother's final act on this earth was to defend her, even as he died. By now, the case had consumed me. I dreamt of Ethan's room, of the writing on the wall, of the screams that must have filled that house before silence took over. But there was still one piece missing, the truth of who held responsibility. Both Clara and Jake had blood on their hands. The DNA, the texts, the document, all threads of a tangled web. But the law demanded clarity. The decision weighed heavier than any I'd faced in my career. 2 suspects, 2 stories, and a dead boy whose voice could only echo through fragments of evidence. But justice demands certainty, and certainty often hides in the smallest detail. That detail came from handwriting analysis. Our specialist finally delivered the report comparing Ethan's notebooks with the message on the wall. After weeks of doubt, the conclusion was clear. Ethan did write, It wasn't me. My chest tightened as I read the findings. The boy's final act was to protect his sister, even as he struggled for air. He wanted the world to know she wasn't guilty. But the handwriting also condemned her. Because if Ethan believed he had to protect Clara, it meant she was involved. Not as the one who suffocated him, but as the reason he was attacked at all. I called both suspects in one last time. Clara sat hunched in her chair, trembling. Jake sat across from me, defiant, his jaw set. I placed the handwriting report on the table. Ethan wrote it himself, I said quietly. He died trying to protect Clara. Clara broke instantly, sobbing uncontrollably. Jake's expression faltered, his confidence cracking. You both were there. You both fought him. But Jake… I leaned closer, my voice low and sharp. You were the one who ended his life. You panicked, you pressed too hard, and Ethan never woke up. Jake slammed his fist on the table, rage flashing in his eyes. She made me do it. You think I wanted to kill some kid? She begged me, said it was the only way. Clara shook her head violently through tears. No, I never wanted this. I just wanted someone to listen to me. Jake twisted everything. The room erupted into chaos, the two of them screaming, blaming, drowning in guilt. I sat in silence, letting their words wash over me, because the truth was clear now. Jake Lawson was charged with first-degree murder. The DNA, the fibers, the deleted plan, all pointed to him as the hand that killed Ethan. But Clara Miller wasn't innocent. Her texts, her silence, her presence in that room, all of it made her an accomplice. She was charged with conspiracy and obstruction of justice. The trial shook Redwood to its core. Reporters filled the courthouse, families wept in the pews, and the town's sense of innocence crumbled. Jake received a life sentence. Clara, given her age and her fractured state of mind, was sentenced to 20 years in juvenile detention to be transferred to state prison upon turning 18. Months later, I stood alone at his grave. The wind rustled through the trees, carrying the faint echoes of children playing nearby. I placed a small toy car, Ethan's favorite, beside the stone. I've seen countless murders in my career, but Ethan's story haunted me in a way none ever had. Because it wasn't just about violence. It was about betrayal, love twisted into poison, and the way innocence can be shattered not by strangers, but by the very people meant to protect it. And as I walked away, I knew one thing for certain. Redwood would never be the same again.